The Boston Massacre. In the turbulent prelude to the American Revolution, tensions boiled over in Boston on March 5, 1770. British soldiers stationed in the city clashed with a mob of colonists. Amid the chaos, shots were fired, leaving several civilians dead and others wounded. The event ignited outrage across the colonies, serving as a catalyst for the intensification of anti-British sentiment. The Whiskey Rebellion. In the aftermath of the American Revolution, the newly formed federal government faced resistance from farmers in western Pennsylvania over an excise tax on whiskey. The conflict escalated into open rebellion in 1794, as armed protesters clashed with federal troops dispatched by President George Washington. Though the rebellion was swiftly quelled, it highlighted the challenges of establishing federal authority in the nascent United States. The Alamo in 1836, during the Texas Revolution, a small garrison of Texan rebels, including Davy Crockett and Jim Bowie, defended the Alamo mission in San Antonio against a much larger force of Mexican troops led by General Santa Anna. Despite their valor and defiance, the defenders were ultimately overwhelmed after a fierce 13-day siege, resulting in their tragic deaths and galvanizing support for Texan independence. The Trail of Tears following the Indian Removal Act of 1830, Native American tribes, particularly the Cherokee, faced forced relocation from their ancestral lands in the southeast to territories west of the Mississippi River. The arduous journey, marked by disease, starvation, and exposure, claimed the lives of thousands, symbolizing the tragic consequences of U.S. government policies towards indigenous peoples. The Civil War, Battle of Gettysburg. In July 1863, the small town of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, became the stage for one of the bloodiest and most decisive battles of the American Civil War. Over 3 days, Union and Confederate forces clashed in a brutal struggle for control. The staggering casualties and the Union victory marked a turning point in the war, shifting momentum in favor of the North and shaping the course of American history. The Spanish-American War, the sinking of the USS Maine. In February 1898, the USS Maine, an American battleship anchored in Havana Harbor, exploded, resulting in the deaths of 266 sailors. The incident, widely believed to be the result of a Spanish attack, inflamed public opinion in the United States, sparking calls for war. The sinking of the Maine served as a catalyst for America's entry into the Spanish-American War, which ultimately led to the acquisition of territories and heightened imperial ambitions. World War I, the sinking of the Lusitania. On May 7, 1915, the British ocean liner RMS Lusitania was torpedoed and sunk by a German submarine off the coast of Ireland, resulting in the deaths of 1,198 passengers and crew, including 128 Americans. The attack, condemned as an act of barbarism, contributed to growing anti-German sentiment in the United States and played a significant role in swaying public opinion towards American intervention in World War I. World War II, the attack on Pearl Harbor. On December 7, 1941, the Imperial Japanese Navy launched a surprise aerial assault on the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. The devastating attack destroyed much of the Pacific Fleet and claimed the lives of over 2,400 Americans. The event thrust the United States into World War II and galvanized national unity and resolve in the face of a global conflict. The Vietnam War, the My Lai Massacre. In March 1968, during the Vietnam War, American troops massacred hundreds of unarmed Vietnamese civilians, including women, children, and the elderly, in the village of My Lai. The atrocity, initially covered up by military officials, shocked the world when it was exposed, fueling anti-war sentiment and undermining public trust in the U.S. government and military leadership. The Gulf War, Highway of Death. During the Persian Gulf War in 1991, retreating Iraqi forces were subjected to a devastating aerial bombardment along the Highway of Death, a stretch of road leading from Kuwait back into Iraq. The relentless assault resulted in significant civilian casualties and raised ethical questions about the use of overwhelming force against a defeated enemy. The war in Afghanistan. Pat Tillman's death. In April 2004, former NFL player Pat Tillman was killed by friendly fire while serving as an Army Ranger in Afghanistan. The circumstances surrounding his death, initially portrayed as the result of enemy action, sparked controversy and led to accusations of a cover-up by the U.S. military. Tillman's tragic death became a symbol of the complexities and contradictions of America's wars in the post-9/11 era. The Iraq War. Abu Ghraib scandal. In 2003, shocking photographs emerged depicting the abuse and torture of detainees by American soldiers at the Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq. The revelations of systemic abuse, including physical and sexual humiliation, sparked international outrage and damaged America's reputation as a champion of human rights. The scandal raised profound questions about the conduct of U.S. military personnel and the ethics of the war on terror. The war in Iraq. Fallujah. In 2004, U.S. forces launched a major offensive against insurgent strongholds in the city of Fallujah, Iraq. The intense urban combat resulted in widespread destruction and civilian casualties, raising concerns about the disproportionate use of force and the impact on civilian populations caught in the crossfire. The Battle of Fallujah exemplified the challenges and complexities of counterinsurgency warfare in the post-9/11 era. The war in Afghanistan. Kunduz Hospital airstrike. In October 2015, a U.S. Air Force AC-130 gunship attacked a hospital run by Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders, in Kunduz, Afghanistan, killing 42 people, including patients and medical staff. The tragic incident, described as a war crime by MSF, raised serious questions about the rules of engagement and the targeting of civilian infrastructure in conflict zones. The war on terror. Guantanamo Bay. Since its establishment in 2002, the Guantanamo Bay detention camp in Cuba has been a source of controversy and criticism due to allegations of torture, indefinite detention without trial, and violations of human rights. The treatment of detainees at Guantanamo Bay has raised profound legal and ethical questions about the balance between national security and civil liberties in the post-9/11 era. The war in Iraq. Weapons of mass destruction. The justification for the 2003 invasion of Iraq was based in part on the claim that Saddam Hussein's regime possessed weapons of mass destruction, WMDs. However, subsequent investigations failed to uncover any evidence of WMDs, leading to accusations of intelligence failures and manipulation by the Bush administration. The controversy surrounding the absence of WMDs undermined public trust in the decision to go to war and fueled anti-war sentiment. The war in Afghanistan. Drone strikes. The use of unmanned aerial vehicles, drones, to conduct targeted killings of suspected militants in Afghanistan and other countries has been a highly controversial aspect of the war on terror. While proponents argue that drone strikes are an effective tool in combating terrorism with minimal risk to American troops, critics raise concerns about civilian casualties, the lack of transparency and accountability, and the potential for creating resentment and radicalization. The Iraq War. Sectarian violence. The U.S.-led invasion of Iraq in 2003 unleashed sectarian tensions that erupted into widespread violence and civil strife. Sunni and Shia militias engaged in brutal attacks, bombings, and reprisals, leading to thousands of deaths and the displacement of millions of Iraqis. The escalation of sectarian violence highlighted the challenges of nation-building and stabilizing Iraq in the aftermath of the toppling of Saddam Hussein's regime. The war in Afghanistan. Insider attacks. Throughout the conflict in Afghanistan, Afghan security forces have carried out insider attacks against their coalition partners, killing and wounding scores of NATO troops. These attacks, often motivated by personal grievances, cultural misunderstandings, or infiltration by insurgent groups, have eroded trust and cooperation between Afghan and Western forces, complicating efforts to train and support local security forces. The war on terror enhanced interrogation techniques. the use of enhanced interrogation techniques, including waterboarding, sleep deprivation, and stress positions, by the CIA and military interrogators in the aftermath of 9/11 has been the subject of intense controversy and debate. Critics argue that such techniques constitute torture and violate international law and American values, while proponents defend their use as necessary for obtaining intelligence and preventing terrorist attacks. The Iraq War, Reconstruction failures. Despite billions of dollars invested in reconstruction efforts, Iraq has struggled to rebuild its infrastructure, economy, and institutions in the aftermath of the 2003 invasion. Corruption, mismanagement, and insecurity have hampered progress, leaving many Iraqis disillusioned and embittered. The failures of reconstruction efforts underscore the complexities and challenges of nation-building in post-conflict environments. The war in Afghanistan, opium trade. Afghanistan's opium trade, fueled by decades of conflict and instability, has become a major source of revenue for insurgent groups, warlords, and corrupt officials. The cultivation and trafficking of opium and heroin undermine efforts to promote stability, development, and governance in Afghanistan, perpetuating a cycle of violence and insecurity. The opium trade represents a significant challenge to the success of international efforts in Afghanistan. The Iraq War, sectarian politics. The post-Saddam political landscape in Iraq has been characterized by deep-seated sectarian divisions and power struggles between Sunni, Shia, and Kurdish factions. Sectarian politics have fueled instability, violence, and corruption, undermining efforts to build a unified and inclusive Iraqi state. The legacy of sectarianism continues to shape Iraq's political dynamics and hinder efforts to achieve reconciliation and national unity. The war in Afghanistan. Corruption and governance. Corruption and ineffective governance have plagued Afghanistan's political system, undermining public trust, eroding state institutions, and fueling grievances that drive support for insurgent groups. Rampant corruption, nepotism, and patronage networks have enriched a narrow elite while impoverishing the majority of Afghans and stalling progress towards democracy and development. Addressing corruption and improving governance remains a critical challenge for Afghanistan's stability and long-term viability. The war on terror, civil liberties. In the wake of 9/11, the United States enacted sweeping counter-terrorism measures, including expanded surveillance powers, indefinite detention, and targeted killings in the name of national security. However, these measures have raised concerns about the erosion of civil liberties, privacy rights, and the rule of law. The balance between security and freedom remains a contentious issue in the ongoing struggle against terrorism. The Iraq War, displacement and refugees. The Iraq War has led to one of the largest displacement crises in modern history, with millions of Iraqis forced to flee their homes due to violence, persecution, and insecurity. Many Iraqis have sought refuge abroad, while others remain internally displaced, facing poverty, discrimination, and limited access to essential services. The displacement crisis has had far-reaching humanitarian and socio-economic consequences, exacerbating instability and hindering recovery and reconstruction efforts. The war on terror, war powers, and executive authority. The war on terror has raised fundamental questions about the balance of powers between the executive, legislative, and judicial branches of government, particularly concerning the use of military force, surveillance, and detention. The expansion of presidential authority and the erosion of congressional oversight have sparked debates about the limits of executive power and the need to uphold constitutional principles and democratic norms. The Iraq War, legacy and lessons learned. As the United States withdraws its military forces from Iraq, the legacy of the war remains deeply contested and divisive. The human cost of the conflict, the failure to find WMDs, and the destabilization of the region have sparked soul-searching and reflection on America's role in the world.